The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched so high that clouds formed near its ceiling. Ambassador Chun Mei-ling looked up at the massive chamber and felt very small. She had felt small every day since arriving here 3 months ago, but today was different. Today she planned to do something that would either change everything or end her career in spectacular failure. Around her, the representatives of 200 species argued in a dozen different languages. The translation device in her ear struggled to keep up, feeding her a constant stream of angry words. At the center of it all stood 2 figures who commanded everyone's attention. The Vex ambassador was a being of living crystal, its body shifting through colors that hurt to look at directly. It had been alive for 12,000 years and remembered when Chun's son was young. Next to it stood the Keltheran war chief, a creature of scales and muscle that stood 4 meters tall, with teeth like daggers and eyes that glowed red with barely contained fury. They were shouting at each other again. They had been shouting at each other for 300 years. The war between the Vex, Dominion, and the Keltheran Collective had consumed a quarter of the known galaxy. Chem had studied the casualty reports until the numbers stopped meaning anything. Trillions dead. Hundreds of worlds burned. Entire civilizations caught between the 2 powers had simply ceased to exist. Their names remembered only in archive files that nobody read anymore. The other council members had given up trying to stop it. They had tried sanctions, blockades, and diplomatic missions. Nothing worked. The Vex and Keltheran were too powerful, too ancient, and too proud to back down. So the galaxy had learned to live with the war, the way people learn to live with a chronic illness that cannot be cured. Chun's own delegation sat in the far corner of the observation gallery. 3 other humans, all looking uncomfortable in their formal clothes, all wondering why they had been sent to this place where nobody wanted them. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council only 17 years ago, when a Vex scout ship found Earth's primitive colony on Mars and realized these strange bipeds had figured out faster-than-light travel. The Council had granted humanity membership, mostly as a curiosity. The elder species found humans amusing in the way adults find children amusing. They smiled at human enthusiasm, chuckled at human naivety, and generally treated the newest members of galactic civilization like pets who had learned a clever trick. Chun had spent those 17 years learning everything she could about the galaxy's true powers. While other humans focused on trade agreements and technology exchanges, she studied history. She learned the Vex language, which was more mathematics than words. She learned Keltheran battle poetry, which was considered their highest art form. She learned how both civilizations thought, what they valued, and what they feared, and she had discovered something that nobody else seemed to have noticed. The war had stopped making sense about 2,000 years ago. Whatever the original cause had been, it was long forgotten. The Vex and Keltheran fought now because stopping would require admitting the war had become meaningless. They fought because not fighting would make them feel foolish. They fought because war had become their identity. Chun stood up. Her aide grabbed her arm. "Ambassador, what are you doing?" He whispered urgently. "Something stupid," she replied, and walked down to the council floor. The chamber was so large that it took her 3 minutes to reach the center. By the time she arrived, some of the nearer delegates had noticed her. A few pointed. Several made sounds that might have been laughter in their various species. The Vex ambassador's crystalline body flickered with what Chen's studies had taught her was amusement. She requested permission to address the council. The laughter grew louder. The council speaker, an ancient being that looked like a floating jellyfish made of light, turned its attention to her. When it spoke, its voice resonated through the chamber like thunder. "The representative from humanity wishes to speak. This is irregular. Humanity does not have mediation status in this conflict." "I'm not requesting mediation status," Chun said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I'm requesting a private summit." between the Vex Overmind and the Keltheran High Warlord, on neutral ground, with humanity as the sole witness and facilitator. The laughter stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse. The Vex Ambassador's colors shifted to something Chun recognized as confusion mixed with contempt. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious," Chun said. The Keltheran war chief leaned down until its massive head was level with hers. Its breath smelled like sulfur and burning metal. "Little human, do you have any idea how many civilizations have tried to end this war? Species that were building empires when your ancestors were still living in caves?" "I've read the reports," Chun said. "All 473 attempts. I know why they failed." "Then you know why you will fail," the Vex Ambassador said. "Maybe," Chun admitted. "But I'm asking anyway. What do you have to lose? If I fail, you can go back to killing each other. You've gotten very good at it over the last 3 centuries. But if there's even a small chance I might succeed, isn't it worth 3 days of your time?" The Keltheran war chief made a sound like rocks grinding together. Chun's translator identified it as laughter. 3 days? You think you can end a 300-year war in 3 days? "I think it's worth trying," Chun said simply. The Vex Ambassador's colors shifted again, running through a spectrum that made Chun's eyes water. Finally, it spoke. "Very well. I agree to this summit. The probability of success is effectively 0, but I am curious to see how humanity chooses to humiliate itself. It will be educational." All eyes turned to the Keltheran war chief. The massive creature stared at Chun for a long moment. Then it showed its teeth in what might have been a smile or a threat. "I accept. But understand this, human. When you fail, and you will fail, the Keltheran Collective will remember that humanity wasted our time with childish fantasies. That memory will last a very long time." "I understand," Chun said. The council speaker's light pulsed brightly. "Then it is agreed. 3 days, neutral ground, no weapons, no military escorts. The human will arrange the location. This council will reconvene in 10 standard days to hear the results of this summit." Chun bowed and walked back to her delegation. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Her aide looked at her like she had gone insane. "Ambassador, what just happened?" he asked. "I just bet humanity's reputation on a crazy idea," Chun said. "Now I need to figure out how to make it work." Behind her, the council chamber erupted in conversation. Some species were taking bets on how quickly the summit would collapse. Others were already writing the historical footnotes about humanity's spectacular diplomatic failure. The Vex and Keltheran delegations were leaving, both completely confident that nothing would change. Chun pulled out her datapad and began reviewing her notes. She had studied these civilizations for 17 years. She knew things about them that they had forgotten about themselves. She knew their weaknesses, their fears, and their secret hopes. And she had one advantage that no other mediator had ever possessed. She represented a species that everyone underestimated. A species so new to the galaxy that the ancient powers barely considered them real players. A species that could be dismissed, ignored, and mocked without consequence. Sometimes, Chun thought, being underestimated was the most powerful weapon of all. The moon Chun chose for the summit had no name, just a designation in the star charts. It orbited a gas giant in human territory, far from either the Vex Dominion or the Keltheran Collective. The surface was mostly ice, beautiful and deadly, with methane geysers that erupted every few hours in spectacular, frozen fountains. Chun had a small habitat constructed at the equator, just large enough for 3 beings to sit comfortably. The walls were transparent, offering a view of the alien landscape in all directions. No place to hide. No place for secrets. Everything visible. The Vex Overmind arrived first, not in person, but as a projection. Its true form existed in a massive crystal matrix, the size of a moon, but it could extend its consciousness through quantum entanglement to appear anywhere in the galaxy. The projection looked like a human, which Chun recognized as a courtesy. The face was neutral, neither male nor female, neither young nor old. The eyes were the only feature that betrayed its alien nature, swirling with mathematical equations instead of pupils. "You have excellent taste in meeting places," the Overmind said. "Isolated, impossible to attack without detection, and cold enough that most biological beings would find it uncomfortable." "Did you choose it specifically to make the Keltheran suffer?" "I chose it because it's neutral," Chun said. "And because it's beautiful. I thought we could all use some beauty after 300 years of ugliness." The Overmind's expression didn't change, but Chun's instruments detected a slight fluctuation in its quantum signature. Surprise, maybe. Or amusement. The Keltheran High Warlord arrived an hour later in a small warship that looked capable of destroying a planet. The ship landed half a kilometer from the habitat, and the Warlord walked across the ice alone. It was even larger than the War Chief Chun had met on the council, easily 5 meters tall, with scars covering its scales like a history written in violence. Inside the habitat, it had to hunch to fit under the ceiling. Chun had designed it that way deliberately. She wanted both parties slightly uncomfortable, slightly off balance. "Let us begin," the Warlord growled. "I have a war to fight." "That's exactly what we're here to discuss," Chun said. "Please, sit." The first 6 hours were predictably terrible. The Vex Overmind and the Keltheran Warlord spent most of that time listing grievances, some dating back thousands of years. Chun let them talk. She took notes. She asked clarifying questions. She served them refreshments that her team had carefully researched to be acceptable to both species. She did not try to argue. She did not try to assign blame. She just listened. On the 7th hour, something changed. The Warlord was describing a battle that had taken place 800 years ago, a particularly brutal engagement where both sides had lost entire fleets. And then it said something that made Chun sit forward. "We had them trapped. Complete tactical superiority. We could have annihilated their entire force. But they activated some kind of new weapon we had never seen before, and we had to retreat." The Overmind's projection flickered. That was not a weapon. That was a desperate overload of our power cores. It should have been impossible. The probability of success was 0.001%. But impossibility means nothing when facing extinction. "You were desperate," the Warlord said. Its tone held something Chun had not heard before. Surprise. "Of course we were desperate," the Overmind said. "You had us cornered. We faced total destruction. So we did something mathematically insane and somehow survived. We thought it was another example of Vex superiority," the Warlord said slowly. "Another technological advantage we could not match. It made us fight harder. It made us more determined to develop our own superweapons. It was luck," the Overmind said. "Random chance. The quantum fluctuations aligned in our favor for a single moment. We have never been able to replicate the result." Chun watched them look at each other. Really look at each other, perhaps for the first time in centuries. "Tell me about the Battle of the Shattered Ring," Chun said quietly. The Warlord's eyes narrowed. "Why that battle?" "Because in all my research, it's the one engagement where the casualty reports don't make sense. Both sides lost exactly the same percentage of forces. Exactly. Down to 3 decimal points. That's statistically impossible unless something else was happening." The Overmind's projection became very still. The Warlord looked away. "Tell me," Chun said again. The silence stretched. Finally, the Warlord spoke. "We were both trying to capture the ring station. It had strategic value, but it also had 3 million civilians taking shelter there, refugees from a dozen different species. The station was failing, critical systems damaged from the fighting. We both received the same sensor data, the Overmind continued. The station would collapse within 6 hours. Everyone inside would die. So we stopped fighting, the warlord said. Just for one day. We evacuated the civilians together. The Vex provided transport ships. We provided security. We worked side by side to save 3 million lives. And then, when the last refugee was safe, we went back to killing each other. We never spoke of it again, the Overmind said. It was treated as classified information on both sides. Proof that we had gone soft. Proof that we had betrayed our people by cooperating with the enemy. Chun pulled up a holographic display showing the casualty figures from that day. You didn't just save civilians. You both held back in the fighting that followed. Neither side wanted to be the first to escalate after what you had just done together. So you fought a careful battle, a measured battle. A battle where neither side really wanted to win. We had no choice but to resume hostilities, the warlord said, but its voice held less certainty now. Why? Chun asked. Who was forcing you? Neither of them answered. Chun stood and walked to the transparent wall, looking out at the frozen landscape. I want to show you something, may I? She pulled up another holographic display, this one showing images from Earth's history. Trenches filled with mud and corpses. Cities reduced to rubble. Mushroom clouds rising over civilizations. This is my world's history, she said. We've been very good at killing each other. We had a war we called the First World War. 9 million dead. Everyone said it was the war to end all wars. 20 years later, we had an even bigger one. 70 million dead. We developed weapons that could destroy our entire species, and we came very close to using them. The warlord and the Overmind watched the images in silence. And then we stopped, Chun said. Not because we suddenly became peaceful. Not because we evolved beyond conflict. We stopped because we were terrified. Because we realized that the next war would be the last thing we ever did. So we found other ways. We learned to compete without destroying. We learned that former enemies could become allies. We learned that pride was not worth extinction. Your species is young, the Overmind said. You have not had time to develop proper hatred. Our species is young, Chun agreed. But maybe that's why we can see what you've forgotten. You've been at war for so long that you've forgotten why you started fighting. You've been enemies for so long that you've forgotten you're both just people trying to survive in a dangerous universe. She turned to face them. I read something in the Kelthorn records. A poem from before the war started. It talked about the beauty of the Vex crystal gardens, how they caught the light of binary stars and made rainbows that stretched across entire continents. The poet wrote that seeing them made him understand that the universe was full of wonders worth protecting. The warlord's expression shifted to something that might have been pain, and I found a Vex mathematical proof. From the same era, Chun continued. It analyzed Kelthorn music, their battle songs. The proof concluded that Kelthorn rhythm patterns contained a complexity that matched the quantum fluctuations of reality itself. The mathematician who wrote it said that listening to Kelthorn music was like hearing the universe sing. The Overmind's projection flickered rapidly. You used to respect each other, Chun said softly. You used to find beauty in each other's civilizations. And then something happened, something that started a conflict. And 300 years later, you've both forgotten what it was like to be anything other than enemies. It is not that simple, the Overmind said. I know, Chun said. Nothing ever is. But I'm not asking you to become friends. I'm not asking you to forget 300 years of death and grief. I'm asking you to consider that maybe just maybe, continuing this war forever is not actually what either of you wants. I'm offering you something that your pride will never let you create for yourselves. What is that? The warlord asked. A way to stop fighting without admitting you were wrong to start. The negotiations continued for 47 days, far longer than the 3 days Chun had promised. Her government sent increasingly urgent messages demanding she return to Earth. The Galactic Council assumed the summit had collapsed, and that Chun was too embarrassed to admit failure. The betting pools on humanity's diplomatic disaster paid out early dividends to those who had predicted complete failure. But inside the small habitat on the frozen moon, something remarkable was happening. The Vex Overmind and the Keltheran High Warlord were talking to each other as equals for the first time in centuries. They argued, of course. They had 300 years of grievances to work through. But Chun had established rules at the start. Every accusation had to be backed by evidence. Every claim of atrocity had to be verified through neutral records. And most importantly, every criticism of the other side had to be balanced by an acknowledgement of one's own failures. Thought it was slow, painful work. There were days when Chun thought the whole thing would collapse. The warlord would roar about some Vex betrayal, its voice shaking the habitat's walls. The Overmind would present mathematical proofs of Keltheran aggression, its logic cold and unyielding. And Chun would sit between them, a small human woman from a young species, and somehow find the words to keep them talking. On the 18th day, the warlord told a story about its childhood. How it had been born during the war, had never known peace, had been trained for combat from the moment it could walk. Its entire life had been shaped by conflict with the Vex. Everything it was, everything it had become, existed only because of this war. If the war ends, the warlord said quietly, "Who am I?" The Overmind was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke. "I was created specifically to prosecute this war. My consciousness was assembled from the greatest military minds in Vex history. Every thought I have, every calculation I perform, is optimized for conflict. I have no purpose without this war." Chun looked at them both. "Maybe that's exactly why you need to end it. Because as long as the war continues, none of you can become anything else. You're both trapped prisoners of your own history." "What would we become?" the Overmind asked. "I don't know," Chun admitted. "But isn't it worth finding out?" On the 23rd day, they began discussing actual terms. Chun had prepared a framework, but she let them shape it. The key was balance. Every concession from one side had to be matched by an equivalent concession from the other. Every loss of face had to be compensated by a gain in something else. The demilitarized zones were the easy part. Both sides were exhausted from 300 years of war. The idea of zones where neither fleet could enter, where civilians could live without fear of becoming casualties, had immediate appeal. The war reparations were harder. Both sides had legitimate claims for damages. Both sides had committed atrocities that could never be forgiven. Chun proposed something radical. Instead of paying each other, both civilizations would contribute to a fund for rebuilding the worlds caught in the middle. The species that had lost everything because of the war would be made whole. "It does not balance," the Overmind objected. "We gain nothing from this." "You gain something more valuable than resources," Chun said. "You gain moral authority. The galaxy has watched you fight for 300 years. They've seen you destroy countless worlds. If you work together to rebuild them, you become something other than warmongers. You become saviors." The Keltheran warlord's eyes glowed brighter. Chun recognized it as interest. On the 35th day, they discussed the military forces. Neither side would agree to complete disarmament. Chun hadn't expected them to. But she proposed joint patrols of the demilitarized zones. Vex and Keltheran ships flying together, protecting the peace they had created. You want us to trust our former enemies to guard our borders? The warlord said. I want you to prove to the galaxy that you're serious about peace, Chun said. Actions matter more than words. Joint patrols show everyone that this isn't just a temporary ceasefire. It's a fundamental change in how you relate to each other. The Overmind ran calculations for 3 hours straight. Finally, it spoke. The probability of betrayal is significant. But the probability of another 300 years of war if we continue on the current path is effectively 100%. The joint patrols represent an acceptable risk. On the 41st day, they discussed what would happen to the warriors. Millions of Keltheran soldiers who had known nothing but combat. Billions of Vex drones programmed for warfare. What would become of them? Chun proposed a transformation. The military forces would become peacekeepers, explorers, and builders. The Keltheran soldiers would use their strength to construct new cities on devastated worlds. The Vex drones would use their precision to rebuild damaged infrastructure. The skills learned in war would be repurposed for peace. It is not the same, the warlord said. There is no honor in construction. Then you will have to create new definitions of honor, Chun said. The old definitions led to 300 years of death. Maybe it's time for better ones. On the 47th day, they reached the final point. The hardest point. The one that would determine whether any of this work had been worth it. Who would sign the treaty first? It seemed like a small thing, a matter of ceremony. But Chun knew better. In the complex culture of both civilizations, being the first to sign would be seen as a sign of weakness. The one who yielded first, who backed down first, who wanted peace more desperately. Both sides refused to sign first. The negotiations nearly collapsed over this single point. Chun sat in her small quarters that night, exhausted and frustrated. She had brought these ancient beings so close to peace, and now it might all fall apart because of pride. Because neither side could bear to be seen as the one who surrendered. She thought about Earth's history, about all the wars that had ended, about all the peace treaties signed. And she realized something. The next morning, she addressed both parties. I have a solution to the signing problem. Neither of you will sign first. Explain, the Overmind demanded. I will sign first, Chun said. As the mediator, as the representative of humanity, I will place my signature on this treaty before either of you. And then you will both sign together at the exact same moment. Neither first, neither last. Equal. The warlord leaned forward. You would take that responsibility? You would be the first name on the document that ends this war? Yes, Chun said simply. Why? The Overmind asked. Your species gains nothing from this. You have inserted yourself into a conflict that does not concern you. You have spent 47 days mediating between powers that could destroy your entire civilization without effort. Why would you take on this burden? Chun thought about how to answer. She thought about all the reasons she had studied these civilizations, all the hours spent learning their languages and cultures. She thought about the trillions who had died in this meaningless war, and the trillions more who would die if it continued. Because someone had to, she said finally. Because the galaxy needed this war to end, and nobody else was willing to try. Because my species is young enough to still believe that impossible things are worth attempting. And because if I fail, if this treaty falls apart and the war continues, I want my name on it. I want history to remember that a human tried and failed, rather than never trying at all. The Overmind's projection became perfectly still. The warlord's eyes dimmed to a soft glow. Very well, the Overmind said. We accept your proposal. Agreed, the warlord said. Let the humans sign first. Let her species bear the responsibility. And let us sign together as equals. Chum felt her hand shaking. She had done it. Against all probability, against all logic, She had brought these ancient enemies to agreement. Now came the hard part, making the galaxy believe it was real. The signing ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of the Galactic Council, the same chamber where Chun had first proposed the impossible summit 57 days earlier. This time, every seat was filled. Representatives from 200 species packed the gallery, all wanting to witness what many still believed would be a spectacular failure. The betting pools had shifted. Some species now thought the treaty might actually be signed, but almost everyone agreed it would collapse within days. Peace between the Vex and Keltherin was simply unthinkable. 300 years of war could not end with a few signatures on a document. Chun stood on the council floor, feeling small again. But this time, the feeling was different. She was small, yes, but she was also about to do something that would echo through galactic history for thousands of years. The Vex Overmind appeared in its full manifestation, not the small human-shaped projection Chun had negotiated with, but a massive crystalline presence that filled half the chamber with prismatic light. The Keltherin High Warlord arrived in ceremonial armor that had been worn by its predecessors for generations, each scratch and dent a reminder of battles fought and enemies slain. The treaty document was displayed holographically, visible to everyone in the chamber. It was 73 pages long, dense with clauses and subclauses, provisions and exceptions. But the core message was simple. The war was over. The council speaker's voice resonated through the hall. We are gathered to witness the signing of the Treaty of the Frozen Moon, mediated by Ambassador Chen Mei-Ling of humanity. This treaty, if ratified, will end 300 years of conflict between the Vex Dominion and the Keltherin Collective. Let the signing begin. Chun stepped forward. Her hand trembled slightly as she raised the signing stylus. In this moment, she represented her entire species. If this worked, humanity would be remembered as the peacemakers. If it failed, they would be remembered as the fools who thought they could stop an eternal war. She placed the stylus against the holographic surface and signed her name. Chen Mei-Ling. Simple, clear. The first signature on the most important document in recent galactic history. She stepped back. The chamber was absolutely silent. The Vex Overmind and the Keltherin High Warlord moved forward together. They had practiced this moment, timing their movements to be perfectly synchronized. They reached the signing surface at the exact same instant. Their respective appendages touched the holographic field together. Two signatures appeared simultaneously, equal, balanced, neither first, neither last. The treaty was signed. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched. And then, from somewhere in the gallery, a single species began to applaud. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire chamber erupted in noise. Preachers of 1,000 different types expressing approval in 1,000 different ways. Chun allowed herself a small smile. But she knew the hard part was just beginning. Signing the treaty was only the first step. Making it last would take years of work. The Overmind's voice cut through the celebration, amplified to fill the chamber. The Vex Dominion acknowledges this peace. We commit our resources to its maintenance. And we acknowledge the role of humanity in making this possible. The species we once dismissed as primitives has accomplished what we could not. They have reminded us that wisdom does not always come with age. The Keltherin Warlord spoke next, its voice a deep rumble that made the floor vibrate. The Keltherin Collective accepts this peace. We will honor its terms. And we will not forget that a young species, barely out of its own solar system, showed us a path we could not see ourselves. Humanity has earned our respect. Chum bowed to both of them, then turned to address the council. This treaty is not just about ending a war. It's about creating something new. The Vex and Keltherin have agreed to joint patrols, shared rebuilding projects, and cultural exchanges. They will work together to heal the wounds caused by 3 centuries of conflict, and humanity will stand as guarantor of this peace, monitoring the demilitarized zones and mediating any disputes that arise. A representative from the Sulax Consortium rose, its gelatinous form quivering with agitation. You speak of monitoring and mediation, but humanity has no military force capable of enforcing this treaty. How can you guarantee anything against powers that could destroy you? Chen had expected this question. We don't enforce the treaty through military strength. We enforce it through accountability. Every violation will be documented and reported to this council. Every act of aggression will be made public. The Vex and Keltherin are not staying peaceful because they fear human weapons. They're staying peaceful because they've agreed to, and because the entire galaxy is watching. The Overmind added its voice. The human is correct. This peace is not based on force, but on mutual interest. We have calculated the costs of continuing the war and the benefits of cooperation. Peace is simply the logical choice. And honor demands we keep our word, the warlord said. The Keltherin do not break treaties. It would shame us before the galaxy. Over the following weeks, the reality of the peace began to sink in. Vex and Keltherin fleets withdrew to their respective territories. The demilitarized zones were established and, remarkably, both sides respected them. Human observer ships, tiny compared to the massive warships they monitored, began their patrols. Not a single violation was reported. Chun returned to Earth briefly, expecting celebration. Instead, she found controversy. Many humans questioned why their species had taken on such a massive responsibility. The cost of maintaining the observer fleet was substantial. The risk was enormous. If the peace collapsed, humanity would be caught in the middle. Chun addressed Earth's Council of Nations, the governing body that represented all of humanity. We're the youngest species in the Galactic Council, she said. We have the smallest territory, the weakest military, the least political influence. But we've just done something that the oldest and most powerful civilizations couldn't do. We've ended a war that everyone else had accepted as eternal. That matters. That changes how the galaxy sees us. But at what cost? One counselor demanded. We've committed our resources to maintaining a peace that might not last. We've made ourselves targets if either side decides to resume fighting. Yes, Chun agreed. We've taken a risk. But consider what we've gained. The Vex and Keltherin respect us now. Not because we're strong, but because we were smart enough and brave enough to do what needed doing. That respect will translate into influence, into opportunities, into a voice in galactic affairs that we could never have earned any other way. The vote to continue humanity's role as guarantor of the peace passed by a narrow margin. Chun knew she would have to prove the value of this commitment through results. Back in space, something unexpected was happening. The joint patrols between Vex and Keltherin forces were actually working. The crews didn't become friends, exactly, but they developed a professional respect. They communicated efficiently. They coordinated their movements. They even began developing shared protocols for responding to emergencies in the demilitarized zones. Chun monitored these developments with cautious optimism. The rebuilding projects were also progressing. Keltherin soldiers and Vex drones worked side by side, reconstructing cities that had been destroyed in the war. It was awkward at first, but they learned to cooperate. They had to. The alternative was failing at something they had publicly committed to do. 6 months after the signing, Chun received a request that surprised her. The Vex Overmind wanted to meet again, privately, just the two of them. She agreed and traveled to the crystal gardens that the Keltherin poet had written about so long ago. The gardens were even more beautiful than the descriptions. Massive crystal formations caught the light from the binary stars and split it into rainbows that danced across the landscape. Chun understood why someone would write poetry about this place. The Overmind appeared in its human-shaped projection. "Thank you for coming, Ambassador." "Of course. What did you want to discuss?" "I wanted to tell you something that I did not say at the signing ceremony," the Overmind said. "I wanted to tell you that you were right." Chun raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About everything. About the war having lost its meaning. About us being trapped by our own history. About there being value in becoming something other than enemies." The Overmind paused. "I have existed for 300 years with a single purpose, to defeat the Keltherin. Now that purpose is gone. I should feel lost. Instead, I feel liberated. What will you do now?" Chun asked. "I am not certain. The Vex are beginning to explore philosophical questions we abandoned when the war started. We are creating art again. We are studying the universe for reasons other than developing weapons. It is strange, uncomfortable, but also exciting." The Overmind's projection smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuinely human. "Thank you for forcing us to try." A month later, Chun received a similar invitation from the Keltherin warlord. They met on a Keltherin world, in a warrior's hall where the battle songs of 1,000 generations echoed from the walls. The warlord looked different. It still wore scars, but the constant tension Chun had seen during the negotiations was gone. It looked, Chun realized, at peace.